The Russ Gurr Show, with Sue Won and the Western Union, and starring Russ Gurr.
Oh, you don't have to go to another land, though it's in man's blood to roam. And it's good to see how the other side lives, but there's still no place like home. Our grasses are greener and the air's so fresh. The Canadian Rockies are the pride of the West, and you don't...
Russ was a celebrity, you know, I mean, he was really well known.
Russ always was the showman. You know, if you get up early in the morning when you're on tour and you're tired and that, Russ was never tired. He'd start the day off putting on a show.
It's like he has a guitar in one hand and his hand on the steering wheel of a tractor, you know? That's how I kind of picture him.
Russ provided that humanity, if you will, that human gift that he had of being able to just bring all of that audience, no matter where he was entertaining, in a very, very intimate relationship.
Russ's songs were unique, and nobody writes songs quite the way Russ did. A lot of his material was written in the combine.
He predated Willie Nelson in wearing a hole by the pick guard. If he broke a string, it wouldn't matter, he'd just keep going. If it's out of tune, he'd just keep going and cover up somehow.
Like, very clearly, there were two Russes. There were two very distinct people that had different experiences.
For him, they were two separate things. So we had a professional relationship there, but his personal life, which is so strange, is all the time we spent together, and we did spend a lot of time together, just did not enter the picture.
You know, he was always, the hair was coiffed, the shirt was pressed and laundered, and there was that was somebody different. I think he loved being Russ Gurr and what Russ Gurr meant, especially in those days.
But that was his public persona.
I should do a bit of yodel in there, Judge.
I guess the one thing that he probably couldn't appreciate today is that you have your own TV show on TV in the 50s or 60s, but most of the people living today never even heard of him. So that's just kind of a folly that people sometimes can do lots of good things, but eventually it's forgotten about. So.
I suppose everyone likes to visit the place where they were born at some time or other, and I did just that the other day. Went out to the little town of Air River, where I was born on the 23rd day of December, quite a while ago now, believe you me. And I was surprised to find so many of the buildings still there. And one thing I really thought was wonderful, I walked into the store there, which is still open for business, shelves are loaded, and I found this was the very same store where I walked in with my father when I was a little wee boy. Probably he had me by the hand, probably bought me an ice cream cone or a bar. And there was the same counter, the same floor, the doors and the windows, and just everything about that store. Just couldn't believe it was still there. And I want to sing now the song of my life on the 23rd day.
On the 23rd day of December I began my long, long journey in a big,
Russell Clarence Gurr was born near the town of Arrow River, Manitoba on December 23, 1918. He grew up on a farm, the second youngest of 7 children.
Russ's dad was a great big giant of a man, gentle as anything. Very English, called you lassie or bonnie lamb. And Russ's mom was a little wee tiny spitfire, and you didn't want to get in trouble with her.
They were playing in the barn, and they were playing school, and they had been given chores, so, you know, they're farm kids. They had chores to do. They got caught playing, and their dad, instead of getting mad and forcing them to do work, he basically allowed them to continue playing as long as their chores were done. So I think that's part of that blossoming and that encouragement, and that, you know, recognizing that kids can be kids, but kids can have fun. I understand that his father, he'd had a harsh childhood. His history, you know, made him kinder to his kids. I think he recognized that there was a lot of potential there, so he let them. And I think that was a wonderful thing, because I don't think that was the norm for that time at all. And I got the impression from Annie Emily that they got their chores done. Yeah, they did it because they were allowed to play and be themselves. And I think there was that kind of mutual respect.
Russ spent his youth amid the Depression and dirty 30s, when summer temperatures soared to record highs and crop prices fell to record lows. Crop yields were diminished by grasshoppers and dust storms.
He came from a time where there was no money, and he came through that Depression era, and he told a great story. He knew that these horses had starved to death in the summer, and in the winter, their bodies were just left because nobody could haul them away or do anything with them. He hiked out there in the middle of the winter, and he cut off the tails and the manes. He sold that for money, and I don't know what he bought with it. I don't know if he ever told me. It was very entrepreneurial of him to find a way to make a little extra cash when there wasn't a lot of opportunity for that.
The summer of 1934 saw the worst of the dust storms. Village fairs, the heartbeat of rural life, were canceled. Ball games still continued if you could stand the dust. Cecil, Russ's youngest sibling, played ball no matter what.
Kids playing ball at school, you got hit in the head with a baseball bat. And, you know, swelling on the brain net. But way back then, they didn't have the medical technology they have today. Probably would have been nothing.
That winter, just 3 days before Russ's 16th birthday, Cecil died. He was 11 years old.
I think he was encouraged to be him, and I think he was encouraged to be a kid because he wasn't the baby, and then the baby died. Maybe that'll, you know, his parents cherished their kids a little more after that and let them have that freedom.
Experiencing hardship never prevented Russ from doing what he loved most. Perhaps it's what kept him going.
He might have even only been in grade 1, I think. And some grade 4 boy in the country school was selling raffle tickets. And you had a chance to win a guitar. And well, behold, if he didn't win it, probably was his start. Yeah.
He played the piano a little bit, but it was the guitar. And I think he was just so connected with it. Self-taught, you know, that was just his thing.
At the age of 18, Russ competed in the Midwest Music Festival. He sang his own composition and won first place.
His mother told him when she was probably way up in her 80s that the judge had wanted to take him back to Toronto with him and train him as a professional singer. And she said no. She didn't want him to go. And I kind of felt sorry for him. I think he thought his mom could do it no wrong. If she decided it wasn't the right thing, then it wasn't the right thing.
Unfortunately, only a month after winning first prize at the music festival, Russ was hospitalized with a life-threatening illness.
A cow was having trouble calving, so, you know, my dad would have done anything to try and, you know, help that calf.
My grandpa wanted to destroy it. My dad insisted that he could save it.
So then he did. But the calf was very sick, and even though my dad had washed up and shampooed and everything, reaching in and trying to take that calf out, must have had a cut, and didn't realize at the time, but that calf was infected with a disease that's in cattle. It's called Bang's disease. It's very deadly.
After 40 days in the hospital, Russ returned to the family farm. On January 5th, 1939, Russ married Phyllis Hunter. 2 years later, they settled on a farm near Hamiota with their family. It would be 3 more years before Russ felt the full effects of the fever that put him in the hospital.
It got that he couldn't breathe. He was breathing fine. He could breathe, but it wasn't doing him any good, so he basically was suffocating. And my mom was, I think the story was looking after 200 hogs, so she had a lot of work to do. He couldn't do anything because he couldn't breathe. And some neighbor told my dad's mother that there was this doctor in Brandon that was kind of performing some kind of miracles or something. You know, you think it's like, this is crazy stuff. They loaded my dad in the back of a Model A or something, and this doctor then was upstairs, second floor, but my dad's on a stretcher. Like they had to carry him up there and then get his turn to see this doctor, Forrester. And when he come in to look at my dad and talk to him and, you know, ask this and that, he said, "It sounds to me, I think you've suffered from very high temperatures," which was true. And this doctor started to massage him up underneath his rib cage. He massaged his lungs, and my dad walked out of there. If you ever listen to any of his songs on his albums, like this guy had more wind than the rest of us put together.
In 1949, Russ sold the farm in Hamiota, bought land near Brandon, and settled in the city.
My dad thought for that price he might as well sell and move to Brandon because there was lots of things he could do.
For Russ, this included moving to Cleveland, Ohio to learn Dr. Forrester's treatment method so that he could help others as he'd been helped. But due to circumstances beyond his control, Russ was unable to stay in Cleveland and moved back to Brandon. In 1955, he was given an opportunity that would set the stage for the rest of his life, helping to establish Russ Gurr, the entertainer.
Saturday night was a big event in small towns. There was always a big crowd in front of Summers Electric Shop watching this strange one-eyed entertainment. We watched stars like Jackie Gleason and the Honeymooners, Ed Sullivan and stuff like that. Then occasionally there was some local productions. The local production was a music show live from CKX Studios, and I think it was Roy Brown's orchestra, but an unforgettable feature of it was a guy called Russ Gurr.
Real Haiti, and maybe I'll ride a wild steer. I'm gonna marry my girl in Calgary and settle down in the West.
So that was my first introduction to Russ. He was sort of like a local hero at that time. There's just, you know, it was Russ.
It seemed kind of neat, but sometimes it almost would be not embarrassing. But I would be bugged about it or teased because, you know, here's my dad on TV yodeling.
You learn very early to deal with something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird having your father's name keep cropping up, and I don't know how it came up, but my choir director, they could hardly wait for whatever night that show was on CKX so they could watch it. And I thought, oh, it's starting all over again. That's all I could think of.
It was just part of being Russ Gurr's daughter. Yeah, just all part and parcel.
Russ was very involved in the Austin Threshermen's reunion. And he was emceeing that, and he wanted to put a show together on the stand in front of the grandstand. So he gave us a call to see if we'd come and do the show. The National Film Board of Canada had a crew there, and they filmed our whole bit on stage. Our show was being presented at the Labyrinth Pavilion at Expo 67. The Freshman's Reunion song was a vital part of that show, and it ran in Labyrinth for hundreds of times. It ran many times a day.
To the Thrashers' reunion they come every year to see those old engines they hold oh so dear. They polish and grease them and then comes the fun. Pour on the gas, boys, and see what will run. Just a bang and a splatter and a steam of whistles call. You're headed for Roston for the Thrasherman's Ball.
Going to an expo is a big deal in and of itself. I remember the lineup being so long, and they kept saying it'll be 3 hours or 3.5 hours. Dad said that I'm going to go and tell them who I am. And I remember my mom saying, they won't care who you are. You don't mean anything to the people who are working. But anyway, he did. They were very leery of who this guy was to begin with, and he had to sing a whole song and actually prove to them. And lo and behold, we got moved to the front of the line and escorted through it. So it was kind of a big deal in the end.
We were looking for new ideas and new thoughts in terms of the approach. And one of the ones that I found most intriguing was at a meeting that I had with one of our elevator managers in Brandon, a chap by the name of John Leppington. And he said, what you need is entertainment, and Federal should consider putting on the entertainment at some of these rural fairs. And he said, I want you to meet Russ Gurr, he said. So that night we had dinner at a restaurant in Brandon, and who comes in but Russ Gurr. But I'll never forget that night, because I asked him a question, for example. I said, Russ, you know, have you ever written your own songs? And he said yes, and then he started singing right in the restaurant. I was embarrassed until I looked around, and everybody had stopped eating. But they weren't stopped eating in annoyance. They had big smiles on their faces. They were excited. And when it was over, they all started clapping. In that just brief moment, I could see what a wonderful ambassador he would be for the company. Because he had such wonderful manners. He had that great sense of humor and unbelievable laughter that just carried through the whole area. But more importantly, he sold me on the idea of sponsoring Russ Gurr and the Western Union around the fair circuit across the prairies.
But he had put a band together, so he called us. And at that time, there was Suan and I, and Barry Foreman, and Jake Kruger, and John Skinner was playing drums.
Every summer, we would be on the road for maybe 4 or 5 weeks. We have traveled with Russ from Manitoba all the way up to the Peace River area.
As far as I know, it was a unique situation. We never heard of any other bands actually doing that, you know, working for a company and touring for a company, and of course the whole idea was to promote federal grain.
The big rush the day or two before he was leaving, there's always a few days there we had to get him ready to go on tour, you know, make sure sometimes we'd have to get new tires put on the stage or check all the wheel bearings because they couldn't have those problems when they're on tour. And a lot of it was left at the last minute. Those are the times I can remember my mom getting a little bit disgusted. You know, we were having to put so much time in on the music business that the farm was maybe suffering for a little bit. I don't know. That was my thoughts.
She never complained, not to me anyway, not out loud. I'm sure there was times where it was, you know, when Dad was never home, I'm sure she found it very difficult.
She had a big load to carry too when he was traveling in the summers, as did my brother Barry. Must have been really tough sometimes.
When he initially came down, said he wanted to do this, and I got to know a little bit more about Russ Gurr, who incidentally I had not heard of before, and mentioned that he was a farmer. And then when he said he had 1,500 acres, I thought, my God, that's an awful lot of acreage. And I was wondering how he could spend that time with us.
Some years it got that he'd be leaving in the middle of June. On years where there was late seeding, I was left alone. I finished seeding, you know, you're trying to spray. Things weren't convenient then. So a 1,500 acre grain farm then with one person was pretty steady. You know, when you're young and you might be, you know, you're not wanting to work to midnight because you got a date tonight or something. You know, that's just the way it was. And your dad's not there. He's gone. He's hoping to come home to have that you have a decent crop.
People forget, but he was a farmer and enjoyed the farming operation very much. Although I think if there was a question of whether the land got seeded that day or whether he performed at the fair, I think he might have performed at the fair and hoped that tomorrow would always be there.
We were so glad when he was gone. We could get back to having a normal life.
I said to Russ, you know, we still need something more. What about creating a song called Federal Grain? And that song shouldn't be an advertisement. It should just be something catchy that you could use to open up every performance. But it would then, people would know that it was Federal Grain that was sponsoring it, but it wasn't hitting them over the head with it. Well, Russ did this, and it was absolutely fantastic.
Oh, we're the Federal Grain Train. We're the Federal Grain Train. Bringing music in the air. Bringing music in the air. Oh, everybody has a pass. Everybody has.
He would go into the exhibit areas of these fairs, and then he would open the show with this song, Federal Grain Train.
Come and gather all around. Come and gather all around. For the Federal Grain Train has just rolled into your town. We'll have a hold-down, showdown. Come on and get your hair down. You got troubles? On the double! We can help you boo!
Well, a lot of the local radio announcers would be present, and they obviously started to record this song, and sure enough, before long, they were playing it on their home stations. I remember one day I was in the office and I was reading, it was the Western Producer or Manto Cooperator, one of the farm press, and here was a whole bunch of letters from the editor, from our opposition. There were letters there complaining to the radio stations that they should never be using a corporate song within their normal programming. Well, as soon as I saw that, I thought, by Lord, they've got a good idea. I said, you know, we're going to change all our radio ads that we have across the prairies that are going on, and we're going to start every radio ad with the Federal Grain Train. And this worked terrific. Actually, unbelievable. Federal Grain Train kept going up the country western hit parade. It became a very, very popular song and was just a wonderful asset in terms of Federal Grain's program at that time.
We hit everything from tiny little towns with a Federal Grain elevator, and we'd play their parade. We had a float that was the stage that we pulled behind a vehicle, and which is why we got to know the Federal Grain song. It was drilled into our heads because that was played throughout the whole parade.
They weren't quite as enamored with the Federal Grain Train song as I was. Didn't bother me at all that it was going on.
Well, it got a little tedious, but I think if you talk to almost any entertainer who's had a hit, a million seller or something, not that this was, but most entertainers, they have to perform that song for their fans for decades on. And most of them are just glad they have it. It's a way to connect with the fans, with the audience.
Usually the people in the fairgrounds were quite strategic where they located them within the exhibit area.
We'd set up outside grandstands, so we would catch the crowd coming from the grandstand shows, and it was dark by then, so we were under lights, and the crowd would come out, hey, free show, they all gather around. It was really quite amazing. There would be people as far as you could see and hanging from rooftops and clustered around our stage.
Everybody else who was exhibitors suddenly found that they didn't have anybody outside their exhibit because they'd all gone to the federal grade stage, you know, which was wonderful as far as we were concerned. But it doesn't make it any good if everybody else is mad at you.
I can always remember Russ in the motorhome as the rest of the band is out on stage.
He was doing gargling so he could yodel properly.
He would have a nose spray that he would spray down his throat and not up his nose. And I said, does that really work? He says, oh yeah, that's great. He says, clears you right up.
But he would realize that he's going to be on stage in about 15 minutes. So he's building up this energy and he's building up the enthusiasm and he's trying to work himself up. He would be doing this little quick step and two-step all the way from one end of the trailer to the other, and you know, the trailer's moving. And I am waiting to go on, and then Russ would come on after me.
We'd bring Sue Ann out, and she'd come bleeping out, and we'd do a duet and dance around and do this, and then she'd go to keyboards, and then we'd say, well, the wild man's about to come. Hold on, he's about to come. We'd build up excitement, you know, waiting for this wild man, Russ Gurr. So finally we bring him on, and Russ comes bounding onto the stage.
Oh, you don't have to go to another land, though it's in man's blood to roam. And it's good to see how the other side lives, but there's still...
He liked to be front and center. He was very much, when he came on stage, he took right over.
Canadian Rockies are the pride of the West, and you don't have to go to Switzerland to hear a yodel loud and clear. Oh,
and his yodeling, of course, his yodeling. I mean, who can forget that booming voice during the yodel?
That was a bit of an eye-opener because yodeling to us was the cowboy movies.
When he yodels, it just comes out and your hair just feels like it's flying, but there's nothing else like it.
I'm way at university, and first day of diploma agriculture class, we all had to get up and tell everybody our name, where we were from, what kind of farm we had. And before I was finished, there's some guy yelling from the back of the room, "Can ya yodel like your old man?" And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I can't even get away from it at a university.
His voice is so clear and powerful.
He could bellow it. He had a projection with his voice that you didn't have to worry too much about sound equipment.
He had such a unique voice. Had such a different sound, I think, compared to many. And I think it blended well with the guitar. And I think that was where it was kind of magical.
He had a voice that people either really liked or really disliked. I never talked to anybody that says, oh, Russ Gurr, he's okay. They either really liked him or they really disliked it. And I think it was his enunciation. He enunciated extremely well, almost too well.
I never saw him make a mistake. I never saw him forget his words.
You seem to remember them all. Even on that reunion show we did when he was in his 80s, he remembered most of the lyrics.
Russ said, doesn't matter who you are, who you're performing for, where you're performing for, always be professional. Because it doesn't matter who the people are. You're still giving them a show, and you give them the best. You owe it to the people.
He somehow knew about the studio, and Russ needed to record an album. He had something different in mind, and I know that after I talked with him for a while, I set up an appointment with Dave Shaw. Dave Shaw was a local musician, played bass, a little bit of piano, but primarily known for bass. I had them get together because Russ had told me about all these ideas with these unique songs. Dave put some music to this, which was very interesting, but because he wrote so many string, brass, backup vocal charts, it did not seem feasible to get Bill Hillman's group involved in that, and so they were basically studio musicians. The best part was, because he was, in essence, producing his own product, he would know when he had his best performance. So instead of me going up there and saying, you know, could you change this? He knew which was his best performance. It took me off the hook, kind of. And when it was good, it was good. And as far as he was concerned, that was the one.
I think Russ's biggest influencers were people like Hank Snow. He loved Hank Snow, and he loved upbeat and up-tempo tunes.
It's hard to describe. It wasn't true country, and it definitely wasn't Stompin' Tom, because the lyrics were a lot more clever and involved, and the orchestrations were quite involved, because they're story songs. They weren't just a Moon June type thing. They were long, involved story songs.
I still listen to a lot of his stuff many times because, again, he had a magical way with words, and I think that's what happens when you spend a lot of time in a combine. I don't know.
He didn't appreciate the sobby love stories where it's, you know, love gone bad.
Very few of his were love songs, you know, so it wasn't something that you'd go drive around with in the evening and put the CD in your car, the 8-track.
He always kept a pad of paper and a pencil beside the bed, because you know, we all wake up and think of something in the middle of the night and then don't remember in the morning, so he'd write it down.
My first year of university, I stayed with him for a few weeks during exams one year, and he would practice guitar at midnight, which was a little odd when you're trying to study, but he was pretty upfront about, I'm going to play this, I hope it doesn't disturb you. He would have a drink, and he would practice, and he would play at midnight. That was his time.
I remember him telling me how some of these songs came to mind. I thought 15 Prime Ministers was one that stands out in my mind, because he had written it for 14 Prime Ministers. And lo and behold, here they have an election, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau wins that election, and now he had to change it to 15 Prime Minister, and now Pierre Elliott Trudeau is the leader of the day. And I just found he could adapt in so many cases by writing it these unique ways. Russ could indeed paint a picture with his words.
But you know, my first recording didn't get off to such a good start, really. My first shipment of albums were coming from Vancouver on a big freight train through the Rocky Mountains. And sure enough, right there in the mountains, out went the rails, and down came the Federal grain train tumbling right into Lake Abamoon. And my friends said, "Gee, Russ, that's a shame, isn't it?" I said, "No way. I think that's great. Make a good song." And here it is, 1,500 albums down the drain.
1,500 albums down the drain. 1,500 albums down the drain. The time had come to make record songs I'd written through the years. Some of them were history and some were filled with tears. I walked into the studios of Century 21 and I heard a voice say, "Rusty boy, things have just begun."
He needed an album because they were going on tour. And so I remember ordering the product, which we did a lot of at the time, and we used a company in Vancouver called Imperial Records. So we ordered 1,500 albums because that's what he felt he needed for this particular tour. We're waiting and waiting, the product is not coming in. And you know, and I know he needs it. He's going on tour and time is running short. So one day I'm tracing this and I'm phoning Imperial Records and I said, "You know, where's our product? I mean, we've got a gentleman here who needs that. He's going on tour." And he said, "Well, we shipped it last week." He says, "You haven't got it?" And I said, "No." He said, "Let me trace it." He calls me back and he said, "You know something? All our product was on a train and the train derailed. All the product is gone." He says, "We're going to press new ones right away, but what are we going to do?" And I said, "I don't know, let me phone my client." So I phoned Russ and I said, Russ, I've got some awful news for you. I said, you know, your 15 other albums are down the drain. And he said, I don't understand. I said, they put them on a train and the train derailed and your albums are gone. And he said, fantastic. And I said, no, you don't understand. You're not getting albums here. I know you're going on tour. He said, you just know what I can write about? He phones me up and he says he needs all this data to get all this information as to where did this train go down. And I checked out with CP at the time, and they said it was Lake Abamoon. And he's fantastic. And then, as you see on the album, where he's visualizing this train derailing, all your albums going down, and as they're going down into the lake, they keep spinning on the rock, and this BC salmon takes out its dorsal fin, puts his dorsal fin on the plastic plate, and hears me yodeling. And I thought, you know, how do you write stuff like that? I mean, that's awesome.
The albums, they're in the bottom of the lake. From the waters of the Abamoon, you can see them crystal plain. My 1,500 albums there from the Federal Grain Train.
I knew Russ was involved with politics. He was a very staunch conservative, and I knew he campaigned for them, but he never really talked much about it. He was thrilled when we played for John Diefenbaker.
When we were in Prince Albert, he'd written the song Hail to the Chief for John Diefenbaker.
He was a Diefenbaker man, as we know. He knew Diefenbaker better than Diefenbaker knew Diefenbaker, I think. And nobody would promote Diefenbaker more than he did.
We went to John's house and visited there, and then had breakfast with him, and then his PR guy set up an appearance.
Oh, hail to Prince Albert, hail to our Duke. We have come to pay tribute to the great Tory chief. Oh, hail to Prince Albert, hail to our Duke. We have come to pay tribute to the great Tory chief.
You know, one thing that has really stuck in my mind as far as the music one was watching his performance for the Queen.
They called it a command performance when you perform for the Queen.
He was quite proud of the fact that, you know, because of English heritage, he was asked to do that. I can remember watching it on TV. I didn't go in to see it.
They all had full makeup on, but of course, for the cameras, that was the first time I'd ever seen him like that. And I remember him saying, your own music or someone else's music, you can get up and sing it anywhere. He said, the most nerve-wracking is when you have to sing "O Canada" or "God Save the Queen." And that's likely when most people make a mistake. So it was kind of a hold your breath moment.
And he was very honored to have been given that opportunity to sing before the Queen. And so, but he thought, while he was honored, he thought it was only right that the Queen had the opportunity to hear him. You know, I mean, it wasn't only a one-way street.
I thought it was fantastic, yeah.
Mom loved that. She thought that was fantastic, and I did too.
And he was so proud, and when he came back, he was just beaming because here was something that was, you know, I guess the pinnacles of his performance career, singing for the Queen.
The federal grain contract had expired. We stayed with him for a year to work for Eli Lilly, the Trefland people.
They hired us to go out and do something totally different, which was, we didn't do the fair circuit at all. We actually ended up playing mainly in farmers' fields.
With Trefland, it was kind of disappointing.
And they were fun, but it wasn't really the midway. You know, it didn't have all that pizzazz.
So we did 1 year of that, and then that was it.
And I think Russ was able to pick up another band, but I don't know, you know, when you pick up new people like that, it's never the same as when you're performing like with your family.
I think the last time we worked together was my 60th birthday. Russ would be, I guess, in his 80s at that time, and he was still doing the songs, and he was still Russ. It was so great to be with him again and to have all the band together.
Of course, we had all the equipment set up, and he did some numbers with us, and that was great because even as he got older, his voice stayed.
It took a show in a Chinese laundry to bring us together.
Started on his 4th album, and I've got 2 cuts. One was called The Town of Lenore. The other one's called The Skunk Stunk. Dave Shaw, who did his musical arrangements, passed away at that time. And he really relied on that, and it gave him the continuity throughout. So his music had kind of a mold that it fit in, and I'm not sure if he would have wanted to continue after that.
My mom was ill for about 10 years with cancer. So all of that kind of got put on hold. And it's a lot of difference in 10 years, you know, in a person, especially an older person, and it just wasn't going to happen after. And I'm sure he regretted it, but he made the choice too to, he said he had to look after Phil. And
he changed a lot after Mom died. I think she kept him grounded. And, meals were at a certain time, and this was done, and that was done, and then he didn't have that. So that was hard to watch.
Dad was really tired after Mom passed away. It wasn't long till there was signs that he, couldn't live on his own any longer. So eventually he moved to Valley View.
But it was right across from CKX Studios. And when my dad got moved from a double room on the north side where he's looking at trees to a south room looking over Victoria Avenue, so you can see what's going on, he's looking at CKX. He brought back all these memories.
I'll tell you, within 2 weeks it was home. It was, and he'd say, well, I should get going, better get home. He always said to me, the thing that keeps him going when he lived in the home was being able to get out and go for a walk.
And I think it was already spring. It wasn't icy, but he fell and broke his leg.
And it wasn't too long till he said to me, Trish, this is going to be the end of me. And you try and play it off. Oh no, Dad, it'll heal and you'll be up and going. And he said, this is what happens to people. If you can't get out and get fresh air and keep moving, he said, your body shuts down, your mind shuts down. And actually, he was right. That was kind of what started the very end. It was in November of 2011, November 8th, I believe.
It's very peaceful. It's not a bad thing to be there when somebody passes away.
Dad could still, you couldn't carry on a conversation, of course, but he could still hear you. And so I'd lean right in and talk into his ear and told me he loved me. So I said the same to him, and he said, this is the end. What do you say, So I said, and how do you feel about that, Dad? He said, I'm okay. I did sing to him. Not very well. And then he says, I love you. Most girls, I think, look up to their dad. It wasn't not difficult to respect him. Every family, it's different. It's different for everyone. No one's perfect, but he was still my dad.
I think you could stand at his graveside and you could think, wow, like look where it ends up. Just the corner of a busy street, really. You know, cars going out of town and a mall next door, and isn't that sad? But I think you have to look at the bigger picture. You've got one life that you know of, that you get to live, and you can do and choose to do with it what you wish, and make it as big or as small as you want it to be. I think he knew that. And I think maybe recording those songs was his way of making it last longer.
The wind above the imprisoned men howled like a mournful western song. It offered little hope for their escape as they waited all day long. Victims of the strange hand of fate, all they could do was hope and pray. And as they huddled close together, the wind above could hear them say, "Listen to the yodeling wind, listen to the message it brings, listen to the song that it sings."
I feel I'm definitely richer for having not only worked with Russ Gurr, but known him.
Listen to the sorrow it brings.
Russ really gave to me some life lessons in the sense of I've always tried to maintain that joie de vivre.
It fills our hearts.
If you say, what are you guys telling these stories about me for, you know? I don't know if they're true, but he says, carry on, carry on.
Tomorrow, listen to.
But the friendship, that was the big thing with Russ. He was a friend.
It brings. Listen to the song that it sings.
He always said farming meant more to him, but I still think if circumstances or the time of life had been a bit different, he'd have pursued an entertainment life.
Well, I can imagine what he's doing now. He's singing and yodeling and yeah. So, yeah. Don't need to worry about him.
We're the federal grain train. Oh, yes, we are.
Bringing music in the air.
Bringing music in the air.
Everybody has a pass.
Everybody has a pass.
You can climb on anywhere.
When you hear the whistle blow,
woo-hoo,
come
we gather all around.
Come and gather all around.
We're the federal grain train. Has just rolled into your town.
There we go.
Was back in 1879, the middle of April, the weather was fine. A group of geolic pioneers head west. They rode the old Red River cart, the covered wagon played its part. The The oxen too at end of day must rest. But on their way with the rising sun, their